I did my undergraduate studies in philosophy, also double majoring in mathematics at Lakeland College, now Lakeland University, which no longer has a philosophy program, and for all I know may not have a math program, but has changed quite a bit over the years. And I was one of few philosophy majors. It really was not a big priority there. And it was kind of a small school. You might say a bit of a backwater compared to the wide world of culture that was going on at the time. And my two philosophy professors were both older, nearing retirement age, neither one of them passionately engaged with the field. And both of them, the consensus that they had was that there were basically three main things going on in philosophy in the United States and in Europe, and that was analytic philosophy, which they thought was, kind of interesting, but probably going to die out. Process philosophy, so, that was sort of representing the American side of things, and then existentialism. And then they said, well, there's also Marxism, but I don't know that anyone really takes that so seriously. And so, you can guess that we weren't getting a very wide range of contemporary thinkers. And, as most places, there was an intro class and a logic class and an ethics class. And then you had, things like philosophy of religion, which I didn't take because I wasn't interested in religion at all at the time. But you had some other philosophies of this and that. And then there was the sequence of history of philosophy. And the way that they did it, there was ancient and medieval, basically just ancient with, a little bit of Augustine and Aquinas tacked on at the end, modern philosophy, and then contemporary philosophy. And contemporary philosophy consisted largely of some, existentialist stuff, some early analytic stuff, William James to throw in for pragmatism, and some process philosophy stuff. And, you'd get some other philosophy stuff in some of your other classes as well. And it was in a modern philosophy class that I actually got introduced to a much wider range of continental philosophy. And it wasn't through the teacher. It was through the quirk of there being a student in the class, Yoshihiro Manoa, who I became kind of friends with after a while. He was a hard person to be friends with, but there's a whole other story probably to be told there. And Yoshihiro was from Japan. His family had made it big in the real estate business in Tokyo, so they had plenty of money. I got the idea he was kind of a black sheep of his family, and they'd allowed him to go where he wanted to go. For some reason, he wanted to be at Lakeland College in, just outside of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and study philosophy there. Who knows why, And he was always kind of a sour guy, but that was, I think, in part because he wasn't all that happy about life, and he was also kind of a deep thinker. It just took a lot to bring that out of him. And so in our modern philosophy class, there were 4 of us in the class. I don't really remember the other students that well, but Yoshihiro and I would talk about stuff. He was a little bit shy, but he was friends with a friend of mine, and they would hang out together. A lot of the foreign students all hung out together, and I hung out with them. So it was about maybe, I would say, 2/3 of the way through the semester, and we all had to write a final paper and present it to the class. Sort of typical undergraduate stuff, something easy for the professor to assign and to grade. Not a lot of work for him. We could do what work we wanted to do. I don't even know what I wrote on at that point. Probably something having to do with Descartes and Spinoza. But he ended up writing this paper, and it was around 70 pages long. And then he came to me and he said, I need you to present this paper because I don't feel that my English is good enough to present it. It was good enough to write it, but not to present it. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds fine. And then he handed me a stack of books. I don't actually have all the books that he gave me. I'm missing one in here. But these are the books that Yoshihiro gave me. And that helped to fill in a lot of gaps. I mean, I filled in some other gaps on my own by reading stuff that I bought in used bookstores. And every one of these was at the time that it was, actually this isn't the original copy of Anti-Oedipus. It was a different edition that we had. I think we had duplicates, so we got rid of the one that Yoshihiro gave me. But they were all brand new when he gave them to me. So that was kind of nice as well. And he laid down this stack of books, and he's like, in order to understand my paper, you're going to have to read these. And I was like, oh, okay. That sounds good. I mean, I had a lot more time on my hands then than I did now. And he said, you can keep them. These are for you. And I was like, free books. Sounds awesome, right? So as it turned out, you didn't actually need to read all of these in order to understand his paper, which the main point of which was that modern philosophy is monological and previous philosophy had been dialogical, and we should make philosophy dialogical again in the present. It was the same point made over and over and over again. But what was the cool thing out of it is I got all these books out of it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these books and why it was nice for him to, give them to me, essentially, gift them to me. So how should I organize them? Let's actually start with Horkheimer and Adorno, the Dialectic of Enlightenment. This was a nice sort of edition. Actually, this is not the original edition either, as far as I remember now too. But it was kind of a cool thing to read. This is sort of a classic of critical theory. If you want to understand it, you need to go through that. Then there was the Deleuze and Guattari Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Now this is weird, wild, wacky stuff, particularly if you don't have as much of a background as you probably need to make sense of it. So I got thrown into the deep end when it comes to Deleuze and Guattari. And, I'd read it and I was like, wow, this is, I know enough about Freud to have some idea what he's talking about, but some of this other stuff I don't know at all. And so, I kept plugging away at it, read other things. I'm not actually a big fan of Deleuze and Guattari together. I actually like Deleuze's stuff on his own quite a bit better. And then there was the one Baudrillard book, Simulations, which was kind of nice to have. These little tiny books, semiotext, right? And it gave me enough of what Baudrillard was talking about. I was into philosophy of language, so all this talk about signs and hyperreality, that was really cool to get into. And then, of course, a big head cracker, Foucault's The Order of Things. Maybe not the place that you should begin with Foucault, but this is the first Foucault book that I had. And, it was kind of nice to have it and to read through it. I can't say that I actually understood that much of what I was reading as an undergraduate. I had a Foucault class in graduate school and reread it then, and by then had enough under my belt to actually understand what was being talked about and to recognize that despite Foucault's insistence that he was not a structuralist, in this book he actually was a structuralist. Then we had Roland Barthes. And there were two things that he gave me from Barthes. We have this pretty cool Elements of Semiology, pretty straightforward book, again, in the philosophy of language or linguistics. And I thought it was, this is some really cool stuff here. And then there was Empire of Signs, which I didn't really know what to make of. And then we got to something, and I don't know why Yoshihiro was so into Bakhtin. But I'm so glad that he was, because he gave me these, Marxism and the Philosophy of Language, which is by Voloshinov, which most scholars think is actually a pseudonym for Mikhail Bakhtin. And this was, again, some really mind-blowing stuff. You put it side by side with some of the philosophy of language stuff that I was getting through analytic philosophy, which largely got itself, into Wittgensteinian confusions and then managed to extricate itself from that. And then some of the stuff that I was looking at in other areas with, like, the foundations of logic because of my philosophy of mathematics background. And this that was focusing on, how Marxist substructures, superstructures fit in with each other, the differences between different kinds of utterances. This was really interesting stuff for me. And then he gave me these two things. Rabelais and His World and Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics. And I can say that I never have read the entirety of Rabelais and His World. It's a book that I've read around in and read some significant parts of. And, Bakhtin is some pretty intense, heady stuff. This one I loved. This book I've read over and over again. Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics. And it is such an interesting work, all the different things that are going on in this. Wow, there's a lot of like water stains and coffee stains in this book as well. That show you, that I was I'm pretty rough on my books. And, what's going on here in terms of the analysis that's taking place in terms of language and ethics and the narrative itself was pretty amazing. So, over the years, I've really benefited from Yoshihiro's whatever was going on in his head, some sort of generosity, some sort of project that he had me in on. And this stack of books wound up filling in a lot of the curriculum that we just didn't have where I went to undergrad. So by the time that I got to grad school, I took a gap year, as they call it these days. I looked at it as just I was burnt out and just wanted to work a job and work on my languages and save to go to Europe, which I did between 94 and 95. I went in the summer of 95 and then immediately started grad school in 95 at Southern Illinois University, a pluralistic department where we had representatives of continental philosophy, analytic philosophy, classical American philosophy. We had one Asian guy who actually got fired for reasons we can talk about some other time. And then we had a few people doing history of philosophy as well. But also good other departments. I worked with the classics department, the history department, the English department, the speech comm department to take other classes. I came in, and if I hadn't had some background in this, I probably would have been much more lost than I was, because this enabled me to have some idea of what not just the cutting edge, but the current discussions actually were. Otherwise, I would have thought that, Sartre was pretty much the end of the story, maybe with de Beauvoir added. I remember one of the things I had read was Marcuse, and I was asking people if they were interested in Marcuse, and they looked at me like I was some weird oddball when I got to SIU. But there was some interest in Marxism. But this post-structuralist stuff was really big, not just in the philosophy department, but also in the speech comm department and the English department. And so, there's a lot of things in the world of philosophy that are rather contingent, and what we study, what we get introduced to, is so contingent on who we encounter and what they put in front of us. So I was so fortunate that I had somebody, not my professors, but somebody else who could toss these books in my lap and give me some other things to read and work on and fill in some of the gaps in my understanding of what was interesting and worth studying at the time. So I should say a belated thanks to Yoshihiro Manoa. Some of these books I've returned to over and over again in the course of my career and my intellectual life. We're talking about something that happened decades ago and still has some impact on me and on the videos that I shoot for all of you. Someday down the line, if I had to pick one of these that I'd like to get to the first, someday maybe I'll actually shoot some stuff on Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics and on Bakhtin himself. I know people would probably rather see Anti-Oedipus and Dialectic of Enlightenment and the Order of Things, but you got to go where your heart is, I think. And I resonate more with Bakhtin than I do with these other authors. So, we'll see what happens in the future with these interesting books that I was gifted